Flying is easy, but for many it's hard to get started with, so learning the basics is essential to becoming a better pilot. With enough time and practice, even you will be able to handle formation flying like this easily. But before that, we need to get the essentials down. So let's get started. I would like to thank Thrustmaster for sponsoring this video and channel. If you're in the market for an entry-level joystick and throttle, then I have a coupon code for 15% off in the description below for the Thrustmaster T-Flight HOTAS 1. It's a decent start and definitely vastly superior to playing with just a mouse and keyboard. Alright guys, so this is lesson 3.5. It is an intermediate lesson, and the reason for this is because we're going to be delving into how an aircraft flies, what effects it has, and how to maintain straight level climbs and turns, that sort of thing. If you're already familiar with how to do this, and you're okay with flying a plane, then you can probably get away with skipping this lesson. Otherwise, stick around, and maybe you'll learn something. For this lesson, we can go to the instant action, select the SU-25T, and on our caucuses we can do the free flight, or in this lesson I am in the Marianas free flight section. Alright, here we are. So if you just started up the mission, just do the following: right Alt and comma to turn the radar warning receiver down. Remember this from our takeoff tutorial, to lower the volume of that. And then the next, you'll see that on the heads-up display we have some additional information we're not going to go over right now. I want you to press 1 on the keyboard several times until you're in this view, and that's just your standard navigational view, and this is fine right there. Before we move on any further, let's go ahead and talk through a couple of the gauges, both on the heads-up display and the analog gauges down here. Do not discount what's going on in front of you here. It's actually not as complicated as it seems. If your heads-up display takes damage and it turns off, this is the only way you're going to know what's going on with your plane. Now, starting up with the heads-up display, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the stuff here. We've already talked about the speed, but as you can see on the upper left corner, we have speed in kilometers per hour. But you do have this little triangle below it. This indicates whether or not you're stable with your speed, which indicates the triangle in the middle position. Or if I were to throttle back and deploy the speed brakes, you'll notice that I'm slowing down. The triangle will indicate that I am now getting much slower. And if I were to throttle up, the triangle will go all the way to the right, indicating that I am increasing its speed. Very simple, but it is actually pretty useful to know what's going on with your airspeed, so that you don't have to take a look at your airspeed indicator, which is located on the left over here, and see what's going on with the needle there. The outer gauge is your indicated airspeed, meanwhile your inner gauge at the very tippy top is your true airspeed. If you would like to know the difference between the two, though you shouldn't need to know right now, you can take a look in Google or YouTube. There's some wonderful explanations about that. On the right hand side we have the altitude gauge in meters, and this is also replicated over here. You have a needle that will represent it, or you just can read out the numbers in the middle, which is far easier. In between the speed and the altitude, you have the heading tape. You can see the triangle indicates the current heading, so if I wanted to go to a heading of 210, the 0 is implied, I will need to place the 21 right underneath the little triangle. And if I wanted to check this on an analog gauge, well, that's over here. This is the HSI, or the Horizontal Situation Indicator. It looks a little complicated, but it is fairly simple. You just have your standard compass. You have to look at it from like a bird's eye view. We're currently heading on a bearing of 210. You can see on the upper left corner, if we have a waypoint selected, it will tell you how many kilometers it is to that waypoint. In this case, 217 kilometers. We don't actually really have anything selected, so don't worry about that. And then on the right hand side, it will tell you what bearing to fly to in order to get to that waypoint. And then the needles in the middle will also point towards the direction of the waypoint. Again, we're not going to go over that today, but this is just so you know where the HSI is and what the HSI is, because we are going to use this quite a bit. It is extremely important for navigation, so it's something to start getting familiar with. But I understand that most of you are just going to reference the heads-up display up here. In the middle, we have a picture of an aircraft. This aircraft, if I start rolling, will show you a depiction of what's going on with your plane in relation to the horizon, represented by the solid line over here and in the middle, and as well as pitch, up and down. Now this gauge is also represented analog-wise with this gauge. This is your ADI, your attitude direction indicator. You can see in the middle we have a representation of our aircraft, and everything that's white on top is above you, everything that's black below the aircraft is below you. And if you would like to put the aircraft in alignment with the horizon, it would be this right here. The wings would be level. As you can see, the wingtips are moving left and right. If we just put them straight and level like so, and then the center of the ball would be aligned with the middle hash mark here, indicating that we are aligned with the horizon. And if I take a look at my heads-up display, more or less that is pretty much accurate. Now there is other information being displayed here that we're not going to touch right now. There are these yellow bars here, there's some check marks on the top and the left, but don't worry about those gauges all around. They don't really matter for you right now. It's something we may touch upon in a future lesson. However, there is the ball slip indicator down below. This little ball is fairly important in keeping your aircraft coordinated in turns. Alright, so if I were to go ahead and make a left-hand turn and then do nothing except for keep some back pressure to keep the altitude where it is, you will notice that the slip indicator has gone all the way to the left. Now, this means that we are using too little, or in this case, no rudder, and we are slipping in the turn. In order to fix this, we would need to step on the ball, which means the ball's to the left, then you step on the left rudder. And I'm going to step on the left rudder until the ball is mainly centered. That's roughly around there. Now, as we're turning, we are more or less coordinated. If I were to use too much rudder and step too far to the left while I'm making the left-hand turn, then we are what we would call skidding in the turn. We will need to relieve some pressure off the left pedal, and now we are back to being coordinated. So all this takes is a little bit of practice. As I turn this to the left, I'm going to step on the left rudder. And then as I turn to the right, I'm going to step on the right rudder. And just practice doing that until you can make these coordinated turns. If you don't have a rudder pedal, don't worry about this way too much. Unlike a Cessna, this thing's really not going to stall out on you or slip out or any of the wonderful things that can happen in a slow and uncoordinated flight. So don't worry about this too much, but it is recommended that you coordinate your turns. Lastly, let's take a look at this gauge on the right, this vertical line with a horizontal arrow going through it. This is the VSI, or the vertical speed indicator. This gauge essentially just lets you know at what rate you're climbing or descending. As you can see right now, we are flying nearly at 0, indicating that we are flying at a perfect altitude without climbing or descending. This gauge is replicated over here with this VSI. You will notice on the left-hand side if the needle goes above, indicating a climb, or if the needle falls below, indicating a descent. We're not going to go over any hard numbers or anything like that. It's mainly just there for you to know whether or not you're flying at altitude or if you're climbing or descending. That's pretty much it. And you'll also notice that there is a backup slip indicator underneath it as well, the same as the one here on the left-hand side. As far as turns, it will also indicate the tendency of the turns. Don't worry about that right now. This yellow needle thing, it's not something you're going to be referencing a lot. The ADI is fairly good at letting you know what's going on with your plane. Lastly, the AOA gauge. On the left-hand side is the AOA, or the angle of attack, while on the right-hand side we have the G meter, or the amount of G's that we're pulling. Currently, it's at 1, because we are experiencing Earth's gravitational pull. Now, in order to fully understand this gauge, let's take a look at what the AOA is.
Alright, so let's talk about a few things in regards to flight physics without having to go all the way into things like Bernoulli's equation. This is the cross-sectional area of a wing. That is the same thing as taking this aircraft's wing, cutting it over here, and then looking at it directly from this side. Cool.
Alright, so here we have the leading edge of the wing. That's the trailing edge of the wing. If you draw a line between that, you get the chord line. Then you have something called the relative wind, which has really nothing to do with wind, but it is the opposite of your flight path. So whenever we're talking about relative wind, just think in your mind flight path, and that's all we're really talking about.
Okay, now just to cover a few things. If I'm saying that this aircraft is moving to the right now, which direction is the flight path? Now, you could assume that it's obviously flying in this direction. However, what if I'm pulling the throttle all the way back into idle and I'm stalling this plane out? Even though I'm keeping the nose up, it might actually be falling down towards Earth, and the flight path is actually down that way, meaning the relative wind, being the opposite of that, would be in this direction. Pretty simple. Now, the angle between the chord line and your flight path, or the relative wind, is now what we call the angle of attack. This is something we are going to be referencing inside the cockpit, so it is something that you should know. The reason being is because the angle of attack determines when the aircraft stalls. Under normal conditions, there is a nice flow of air over the wing. However, the more you start increasing that angle of attack, the more disruption we're causing. And at some point, at some critical angle of attack, there is a complete separation of airflow, which causes the stall. Alright, and based on that, you should have a pretty decent idea of what a flight path is and what the angle of attack is. There's really no need to overcomplicate this. This image is based on a Cessna, I believe, so don't take any of these numbers to heart. But you will see that on the left-hand side represents straight and level flight at 1 Gs because you're experiencing Earth's gravitational pull. However, there is still an angle of attack of 4.5 there, even in straight and level flight. Why is that? And that's because you will always have some angle of attack, even in straight and level flight, unless you're a spaceship with some massive thrust-to-weight ratio, which we do not have in a Frogfoot, much less a Cessna. And it has a lot to do with speed here. As you can see in this image, on the left-hand side, very high speed will yield very little angle of attack. But the slower you go, the more pitch-up angle you're going to need to maintain that very same altitude. And as you do that, you're going to increase your angle of attack. Now, what the rest of this image shows you is the more you try and pull back and pull back and pull back on a stick, you're going to increase that angle of attack until at some critical angle of attack, you're going to create that separation of airflow and she is going to stall. So you have to be pretty careful about how much you pull back on a stick or the plane's not going to like it. And this is true for all planes. But you need to be very careful with the Frogfoot because it's not a fighter jet and it requires a little bit more care. And it is the reason why a lot of people are very upset when they fly an SU-25T thinking that it falls out of the sky. And that's not the case. You're just handling it like it's a fighter jet, which it is not. Okay, so with that knowledge out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at how to do straight and level flying. Straight and level flying is something that you need to master because it is what all other maneuvers are derived from. If you cannot do this, you cannot do anything else. In order to get the aircraft to be straight and level, you're going to need a more or less stable speed. Currently, we're doing 480 kph, which is fine. The triangle is in the middle, indicating that we are more or less stable at that speed. And then we're going to take a look at our altimeter. That is going to be our primary gauge to let us know whether we're climbing or descending. We seem to be doing pretty okay, though we are descending just ever so slightly. The second gauge we're going to reference is our VSI, vertical speed indicator. It is indicating below the middle hash mark with a 1. It's actually -1. And if we take a look here, you'll notice that we are ever so slightly into the descent. So all I need to do here is just pitch back just a little bit, and we are now flying straight and level. It is just a matter of being fairly gentle with the aircraft, and as you can see, everything's fine. However, I have also used another technique called trimming. Trimming is something that a lot of you people have a very difficult time understanding what it even is or how to use it. And without the proper use of trimming, you're not going to achieve straight and level flight like this to be able to just take your hands off the controller. I can walk away, go to the bathroom, and I'll be fine right now. So let's go over how to trim. What is trim? We've already mapped trim before in the controls section, so you should already have that either written down or you should have it mapped to your stick. If I were to look at my stick right now, if I just move my stick around and I let go, it is going to go back generally to the middle. I want you to note the white line in the background as well as the white line along with the joystick. You see how that aligns? This is there to help you see whether or not the stick is perfectly aligned with the middle, the center default position. Okay? Just something to keep in track there. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at a very common situation. I'm going to press F2 to go external view here. You're going to notice that I have a weapon on my right wing, which is causing me some trouble. I have more weight on one side of the wing than I have on the other. And, as you notice, I am flying relatively straight forward, but look where my stick is. right? So if I were to let go of my stick, the plane wants to roll right. I have an imbalance, right? In order to keep myself straight and level here, it's actually taken quite a bit of stick to the left in order to do so. Trim here will help me immensely. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit trim left, and then I'm going to let go of the stick when it feels like it's pretty much centered. So I'm going to go ahead and keep trimming to the left by tapping left trim. I'm going to let go right around there. I am hands off right now, and the aircraft is flying relatively fine. That is what trim does. It basically moves the center from the center position to a new center position and keeps it there without having to constantly apply pressure to the stick. Hey, I want to trim the aircraft while I go into a climb. Okay, I'm going to throttle forward to go into a climb. I'm going to pitch up. And let's say I want to stay right here, right? If I let go of the stick right now, she's going to want to keep climbing. And she's rolling to the right. Okay, so tap trim to the left a little bit and trim down. And now, if I were to level off the aircraft, there you go. She's pretty much steady. Do I have to retrim a little bit? Sure. Maybe she's rolling a little bit too far to the left now. And there we go. We're stable. I'm hands off right now. Completely hands off. So that's all trim is. And then if you ever at any point need to reset your trim, especially if, let's say, you took off, you had to trim your plane a whole bunch, and then you're about to take off again and you forget to trim, and your trim is in some wacky position like this, as soon as you start rolling and you pull back the stick to take off, you may suddenly find yourself rolling and crashing into the ground because the center of the stick is like back here somewhere. If we go into the controls over here, adjust controls, and we scroll down to the trim section, we do not have a trim reset. Other aircraft like the SU-27, for instance, do have it. But that does not work for us, which means I can't press a button and bring the stick back to its neutral position. What we need to do is look at the stick, move the trim back to its neutral position, which is roughly around there. Here we go. And then we've trimmed the airplane. Now, I still have that weight over here, so what if I dump that weight? I'm going to press left Control W. I've dumped the weight. Oh, hey, look at that. I'm no longer rolling. And the only other thing that I would need to do is make sure that I have my pitch trimmed more or less right there. And the plane is back to normal right now. It's as if I've never touched the trim to begin with. Wonderful. And that's all there is to trim. Okay, so with the aircraft more or less stable and flying straight and level, if I wanted to increase speed, I would obviously want to throttle up. If I were to just increase speed right now, the nose of the aircraft would want to climb on me. So I would need to push stick forward in order to maintain straight and level, right? I'm looking at my VSI right now in order to make sure that I'm flying straight and level. Now, on the opposite hand, if I wanted to slow the aircraft down while maintaining altitude, I'm going to need to throttle back. I'm going to deploy speed brakes as well. But I'm going to notice that the aircraft's nose is going to want to drop. I'm already descending. My VSI is telling me that. So I will need to pitch back on the stick in order to keep my altitude. So let's keep pitching back, and right around there. Notice that as I do this, my angle of attack is going to increase. If I'm going to continue doing this, my angle of attack is going to increase so much that it's going to go into the red zone. And now, we've reached the critical angle of attack where the aircraft is now stalling. I'm still maintaining speed a little bit, but if I were to push back any more, it's too much, and the aircraft can no longer hold itself, and it's going to start rolling on me. You'll notice you have very little control, and then the aircraft will want to roll on you and wing stall. Now you'll notice that when we are at this slower speed, the aircraft becomes very sluggish. Look how much I'm moving the stick, and not a whole lot is going on with the plane. The slower you go, the less air is going through the control surfaces, and you will not retain as much control of the plane. So what do we do in this situation when we're stalling out like this? Unload. Push to forward. Throttle forward. Regain speed. Gently climb out. And regain control over the aircraft. Very easy. What you do not want to do is enter a secondary stall by pulling back the stick way too hard. Allow me to demonstrate. So here we are stalling again. Okay, I'm gonna throttle forward, and then I'm gonna try and push back. And I've entered a secondary stall. I need to unload the stick, and then gently start climbing out. And that's how you do that. So you have to be careful about how you get out of a stall. Obviously, the next step would be climbs and descents. If I want to climb, I'm obviously going to increase my throttle, and if I were to do nothing, the aircraft's nose will climb on its own. We want to climb without descending too much, so I would climb until I pitch up to an angle, which allows my speed to be pretty much constant. So then I'm going to control my speed with my pitch instead. So I pitched forward there instead of pitching back, and back, so I don't stall the plane out. And I'm going to pitch until I feel comfortable and the aircraft is maintaining its speed while climbing. And this is perfectly fine. On the contrary, if I wanted to descend, I would obviously throttle back the aircraft. And as I do so, the nose of the aircraft is going to naturally want to descend. And then I would just keep the aircraft speed controlled with my pitch. If I don't want to increase speed, I would pitch back on the stick in order to control the speed. If it's still not enough, you can always deploy your speed brakes. And you'll notice it represented down here to let you know that you've deployed speed brakes. And then continue to maintain your speed by controlling it with pitch. Alright, let's recover, get back to level flight. Speed brakes are in, speed's in, stabilize everything, we're back to stable flight. Wonderful. Alright, so the final thing is to talk about turns. A turn is very simple. I'm just going to roll the aircraft to the side, and then I'm just going to let go. You're going to notice that when I do so, the aircraft's nose is going to start to want to drop on its own. My VSI is dropping, and it's going to continue to drop. And this is because, as I've rolled the aircraft to the side, I have converted my lift, which was just straight up before, into a vertical and horizontal component. And this has reduced the amount of normal lift that I would have if I had the wings level. So if I wanted to turn but maintain altitude and bring my VSI back to 0, I would need to take the stick and push back on the stick until the VSI is back at 0. Alternatively, you can also just increase your throttle. If you increase the throttle, the nose will naturally want to climb with the increased thrust, and this will help you maintain altitude while you're turning. If you want to turn more aggressively, then you can bank the aircraft more, but then you're going to need to pull back more in order to maintain altitude. The more aggressive your bank is, the more back pressure it's going to take to keep this altitude. But you'll also notice that as you do so, your angle of attack is going to continue to increase. So the harder you pull, the more AOA you pull, the more G's on the right you're also going to pull. A lot of people are also quite upset when they hop into the Frogfoot because they say that this thing handles like a bus. They're not wrong, but they're also not handling the plane to its full capabilities. If I wanted to make the best right-hand turn that I can possibly make under the given circumstances, I will need to pay close attention to the AOA gauge. Now, you've already seen what happens when the AOA gauge goes into the red zone. So what is that yellow zone all about? Well, the yellow zone is the sweet spot. Basically, if I increase my thrust here and start making a turn and pull back on the stick to try and maintain altitude as I do so, you'll notice that I have now reached the yellow zone. This is the sweet spot. Basically, I'm now turning at the best turn rate that I can possibly get given my current circumstances. But notice how I am dangerously close to being way too close to that red zone. And if I cross the threshold from yellow into the red, you know, that happens. And the aircraft stalls. So there's a fine line of being able to turn really, really quickly and stalling the plane out, which requires very fine movement, which you're not going to get on a mouse and keyboard. You can get it on the controller, but you can especially get it with a joystick. So notice how I can sit here in the yellow zone right now, and I'm making pretty decent progress in terms of turning the aircraft. She's no fighter jet, but she can turn, as long as you treat her well. And you can usually tell when the aircraft starts to shake that you're very close, if not at the red zone. And then all you do is just release a little bit of back pressure, and then you're back to the yellow zone. Easy peasy. And all of that as long as I'm paying attention to the AOA gauge. Keep that in mind. Let's also lastly talk about overspeeding this plane. If I were to pitch the aircraft down with full throttles forward, you're going to notice that as I pick up speed, at some point the aircraft's going to want to start shaking violently. As I'm increasing that airspeed, reaching 800 kph and going past it, somewhere around 900 or so, she's going to start to shake. And there's the shake. The aircraft's nose is going to want to sink into the ground, so you're going to need to pull back. And if you continue this and try and make any sharp maneuver, the wings will snap. So this is a very dangerous situation to be in. Right now, I'm not going to break apart, but any sudden movement of the stick is almost guaranteed instant death. So this is not where you want to be. You are definitely way over speeding the aircraft. So all I'm going to do is going to throttle back, deploy speed brakes for a little bit. Now that we're back to a nice stable flight, going to throttle forward, speed brakes in, and then fly nice constant airspeed. So please fight the urge to fly as fast as possible in the Frogfoot. Keep in mind all of these visual cues that the aircraft's giving you. Because if you're starting to overspeed and you see the ground coming up beneath you, and you're like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, let me pull back, pull back, pull back, pull back. If you're going way too fast, that is going to happen to you. So manage your speed. So the other thing that a lot of people ask me is, well, how do I get better at handling the plane? She feels horrible. I don't really know how to control her. Well, obviously keep in mind everything that I've just told you. But the real thing that's going to help you the most is fly the plane. Fly the plane. Just keep flying it and do maneuvers. The way I learned back in the day before YouTube videos really existed on any of these subjects is to essentially just do challenges for myself. I'd be flying underneath bridges, see at what altitude I can do a loop in this aircraft or something to that extent. I'm going to fly this near the ground and then see how far I can push this plane before she starts to not like what I'm doing. And the more you do this, the more you're going to understand the limits of your plane, and the more you're going to know how far you can really push this thing before she starts to break apart. And notice, I can do barrel rolls, I can do loops, I can do everything in this plane. As long as you know how to handle her and you don't go beyond certain limits, a lot of which has to do with that angle of attack, and some of which has to do with speed. And it's everything we've talked about in this episode. So if all you want to do is get better, then just fly and make challenges for yourself and have fun. That's the entire point of all this. Have fun. It is going to be a little frustrating at first, but the more you do this, the more you're going to realize, oh, you know, it's actually not that bad. And this plane is tons of fun, as long as you know how to handle it. So get out there, fly around, do some fun stuff, and enjoy yourself. Alright guys, I will see you on the next episode where we're going to be going over how to land this aircraft. That's going to be fun.